Welcome to The Explainer. We're about to break down one of the biggest economic bombshells in recent memory, the Liberation Day tariffs of 2025. This was a trade shock that, honestly, almost nobody saw coming.
And it all kicked off with this really dramatic quote on a day the president himself called Liberation Day. I mean, that name alone tells you everything, right? It was meant to signal a total break from the past, a complete rewriting of America's role in the global economy.
So, on April 2nd, 2025, the administration pulled out a pretty powerful tool, one you don't see used very often, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. People call it IEEPA. What they did was they declared the U.S. trade deficit a national emergency. And boom, just like that, they had the legal justification they needed for a complete overhaul of trade policy. And the goals? Well, they were huge. We're talking about boosting American manufacturing, creating tons of jobs, and pulling in trillions of dollars. The whole idea was to completely reshape the rules of global trade and, as they put it, finally fix decades of unfair deals that hurt the U.S. Okay, so that's the big picture. But what did the policy actually do? Well, it all came down to two key executive orders that were signed that day, and they each went after a different piece of the trade puzzle. It was basically a 1-2 punch. The first order, that's EO 14257, was the big one. It slapped a new set of tariffs on pretty much all imports. Then you had the second order, EO 14256, which was much more targeted. It was like a laser beam aimed right at ending that de minimis loophole for small packages, those under $800 shipments that were coming in duty-free, especially from China. The central idea behind all of this was something they called reciprocity. The argument was, hey, we're just leveling the playing field. Whatever barriers you put up against us, we're going to mirror them back at you. The ultimate goal, to drive every single trade deficit with every single country down to zero. So how did they calculate these new tariffs? This is where it gets really interesting. They didn't do some deep dive into other countries' regulations. Nope. They used a super simple and, let's just say, very controversial three-step formula that was based entirely on the trade deficit number itself. Let's actually walk through an example to see how this worked. Take China. You look at the numbers. The U.S. brings in $439 billion in imports, but only sends out $144 billion in exports. You plug that into their formula, and it spits out a trade barrier of 67%. Then they cut that number in half to get the final tariff rate, 34%. And get this, that was on top of a brand new 10% baseline tariff that hit almost every country. Now, because this formula was so, blunt, it led to some really strange, almost comical results. I mean, the U.S. actually applied tariffs to a place called Heard Island, which is an uninhabited rock in the Antarctic with penguins and a volcano. Seriously, it was probably just a data glitch, but it just goes to show how this one-size-fits-all formula didn't exactly have a lot of nuance. As you can imagine, economists pretty much immediately pounced on this. They basically said the formula was, and I'm quoting here, totally silly. Their point was that a trade deficit isn't some simple scoreboard of fairness. It's a complicated thing that reflects huge economic forces, like how much a country saves versus how much it invests. It's not just about trade barriers. So, you drop a bombshell like this on the world. What happens next? Well, exactly what you'd expect. The global financial markets absolutely panic. And just look at this timeline. It shows you how incredibly fast this all went down. We're talking about the span of a single week. 1 week. From the big announcement to a worldwide market crash and then a sudden, shocking U-turn on the policy. The reaction wasn't just fast. It was absolutely brutal. The day after the announcement, April 3rd, the Nasdaq suffered its single biggest point drop in its entire history. The S&P 500 had its second worst day ever. We're talking trillions, with a T, of dollars in value just gone, vanished in a few hours. And while all this chaos was unfolding in the markets, the president was out there publicly defending the move. He was projecting total confidence, saying everything was going very well, and even called the tariffs a beautiful thing to behold. But then something completely unexpected happened. Just hours, literally hours, after those really high country-specific tariffs kicked in, the White House hit the brakes, hard. They announced a 90-day pause on the biggest tariffs, saying they were worried about a potential crash in the bond market. That left just the 10% baseline tariff in place, but it was a massive, stunning reversal. Now, this 90-day pause didn't exactly calm things down. If anything, it just kicked off a mad scramble. All around the world, countries started a frantic period of diplomacy, trying to negotiate better deals before the clock ran out. And for a lot of countries, it actually worked. After all that negotiation, some of those initial sky-high tariff rates got chopped down. Just look at Lesotho. They went from facing a massive 50% tariff, the highest of any country, all the way down to 15%. That's a huge change. But here's the key thing to remember. Even with all these new deals, that 10% baseline tariff, it stayed. And that alone was a massive shock to the system. It pushed the average U.S. tariff rate to its highest point since the 1930s, and the infamous Smoot-Hawley tariffs, which, as you might know, many historians blame for making the Great Depression even worse. So you have the economic fallout, the diplomatic scramble, and then a whole new front opened up, the legal battle. Almost right away, lawsuits were filed in federal court challenging the president's very authority to do any of this. And the courts, well, they sided with the challengers. Both the U.S. Court of International Trade and then a federal appeals court ruled that the president had overstepped his authority. Their reasoning was pretty simple. They just couldn't find a rational connection between the so-called national emergency, the trade deficit, and the solution, these tariffs. But, and this is a huge but, they put their own rulings on pause. So the tariffs actually stayed in effect while everyone waited for the final showdown at the Supreme Court. And so that's where things stand, leaving us with this massive, fundamental question. Just how far can a president's emergency powers really go? Can they be used to single-handedly reshape the entire global economy? You see, the Liberation Day tariffs weren't just about trade. They ended up igniting a deep constitutional debate about the very limits of executive power, a debate that is very much still alive today.